So hello, today is my second attempt at filming this video. I filmed it already a few days ago, but I was not satisfied with the quality and I felt like I could do a better job, so here we are. So if I look a little bit low-spirited, that's why. Today I'm going to show you my whole collection of classics. I feel like it's not as big as some people might think, for two reasons. One, I don't mind unhauling classics that I didn't like. There are some exceptions, but yeah, that's the general rule. And two, some of the classics that I read kind of at the beginning of my journey with classics, like after I finished school, I read them in Polish. So there are some like big titles, like major works that I don't have here because this is my kind of English bookshelf and I have them in my kind of Polish translations of classics. I will show them to you at the end of the video very quickly, so if you don't care you can just click out of the video earlier. So I will be showing you mostly three bookshelves today. This one, the one above, and there's also one below you can see here. The one below is actually my bookshelf with modern classics, and I was pondering whether I should show them to you or not, but I felt like you might want to see them too, so let's go. So here we have bookshelf number one. You don't really see this one that often because it's still like up high. I am actually pretty satisfied with how it looks, although the Penguin English Library classics are a little bit spilling out right over there. So let's get a little bit closer. Let me move the camera. As you can see, here I have the Penguin Black Classics, the Penguin Mini Black Classics, I don't remember what they're called. Here I have, wait, let me check, actually I have two other books hidden behind this book. This is the, Penguin Classics Deluxe Edition. Yeah, I knew it was something deluxe. This is Deluxe Penguin Classics. So I forgot to say it, but as you can see, this bookshelf is filled with Penguin Classics, so this is my Penguin bookshelf. And here we have my Penguin English Library. Why are they this way? They should be this way. I'll take them off anyway later. So it used to be just one row, but there's just too many of them right now. So this is how it's looking, and now we'll show you every single one book on this bookshelf myself. So from bookshelf number one, starting from Penguin Black Classics, we have Lady Susan, The Watsons and Sanditon, all by Jane Austen. I have read them all and thoroughly enjoyed it. Then we have The Time Machine by H.G. Wells. I have not read this yet. Then we have The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. I also haven't read it yet, and I'm a little bit apprehensive because it does have infidelity in it, and I'm not a fan of that. Next we have The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. I have not read this yet, and this is a brick of a book. It's like over 700 pages long. Then we have Morris, Selected Short Stories and Aspects of a Novel, all by Ian Forster. I have not gotten to his short stories yet. Then we have As You Like It by William Shakespeare. This is definitely my favorite Shakespeare's comedy. Then we have Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller, which I really did not enjoy. I probably should unhaul it. And a collection of plays by Anton Chekhov. From this collection I have only read The Cherry Orchard, but I really enjoyed it. And lastly, when it comes to Penguin Black Classics, we have On Liberty and the Subjection of Woman by John Stuart Mill. On Subjection of Woman is a feminist text written by a man, and John Stuart Mill actually fought for women's rights for years. I think he presented some kind of mandate or law that would, give some rights to women, and, he was rejected. But he fought for years for this issue, so we love a feminist. Then we have my Penguin Little Black Classics, and I am happy to say that I have read them all. We have The Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen, which is her collection of juvenilia, and I fairly enjoyed it. Then we have The Meek One by Fyodor Dostoevsky, and I do not remember anything about it. I think I gave 3 stars, but... Then we have How Much Land Does a Man Need by Leo Tolstoy, and I remember not liking it. Then we have Lord Arthur Saville's Crime by Oscar Wilde, and I really enjoyed this short story. It's like a satire on Gothic fiction. It's really funny, really enjoyed it. Then we have 2 collections of poems which I did not enjoy. We have My Life Has Stood a Loaded Gun by Emily Dickinson and The Night is Darkening Around Me by Emily Bronte. It wasn't my thing. Then we have A Pair of Silk Stockings by Kate Chopin. I didn't really enjoy it much. Then we have The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and this is one of my favorite short stories. If you haven't read it yet, you really should give it a shot. Only Dull People Are Brilliant at Breakfast by Oscar Wilde, which is just a collection of his witty remarks. Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke, which is one of my favorites. I don't want to say books, but things I have read this year. It's just really stunning advice on like life, writing, love. I really recommend it. And lastly, when it comes to Little Penguin Black Classics, we have The Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. I read it for university and will be rereading it soon for my thesis, Sociology Life. Then we have the Penguin Deluxe edition of We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, and I didn't love it, didn't hate it, gave it frequent 5 stars, but the edition is stunning. It has like deckled edges, deckled pages, and French flaps that are really pretty, and the back is scary. And the 2 books behind it were Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte, which gave 4 stars, and The Professor by Charlotte Bronte, which I gave 3 stars. So now let's get to Penguin English Library Classics. There's a lot, y'all. So first we have A Room of View, Where Angels Fear to Tread, which is a mouthful, and Howards End, all by Ian Forster, and I have read them all. Can you tell I'm a fan of Ian Forster? Then we have The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton and Ethan Frome, also by Edith Wharton. I have read The House of Mirth last year and it was my favorite book of last year. I'm not sure if you can tell, but the book has gone for some stuff. I spilled water on it and I'm sad. Then we have The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, which I really loved. It was a very entertaining read. It's kind of a mystery. It's categorized as sensation fiction, and it really surprised me. I would really recommend it. And also we have The Moonstone, also by Wilkie Collins. I really love this cover. Can you see how pretty it is? I think I'm going to try to read this during Victober this year. Then we have Middlemarch and The Mill on the Floss, both by George Eliot. I read Middlemarch and gave it 3 stars. I actually wrote a review on Goodreads that I was kind of satisfied with, which happens like never. So I will link it in the description if you would like to hear more of my thoughts on this. And The Mill on the Floss I haven't read yet, but I've heard some mixed things. So we'll see. We have Villette by Charlotte Bronte, which I ended up giving 4 stars to, but I hated the first half and absolutely loved the second half. I've never had this kind of experience with a book. Honestly, I prefer this kind of reading experience, like at the end of the book, I have more of like positive thoughts rather than enjoy it throughout but be kind of let down by the ending. So yeah, I did give it 4 stars. Then we have The Tenant of Whiteful Hall by Anne Bronte. I love Anne Bronte. Really, more people should read her, especially The Tenant of Whiteful Hall. It's my favorite book by any of the Bronte sisters, so give it a try if you haven't. Then we have Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. I do not get along with Charles Dickens. I give this 3 stars. I also read Christmas Carol and A Tale of Two Cities, and I DNF'd A Tale of Two Cities. I just don't like his writing style. I don't get along with humor. I don't find it funny at all. I think his characters feel more like caricatures than real people. I'm sorry to go off like on Charles Dickens like that, but yeah, it's just not my thing. But I understand if it's your thing. Like, I understand that this is just kind of a matter of like taste, so I might end up unhauling this. Then we have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. I read this and I felt like it was a little bit underwhelming, and I feel like it would be more of an enjoyable read if you didn't know the twist. But I feel like at this point everyone knows the twist in this book. So next is The Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I am worried because I haven't read this yet, but when I was reading aspects of a novel, which is a non-fiction book by Ian Forster, he was talking about Henry James, and he was given an example. So he put like an excerpt from his book, like a paragraph, and I read it and I was like, oof, I don't like his writing style. So I'm a little bit apprehensive when it comes to this book, but I do want to give him a first shot. So if you've read any of Henry James, I would love to hear your thoughts, especially in this book. And lastly, we have Wives and Daughter by Elizabeth Gaskell. I haven't read this yet, and for a long time I was actually thinking I wasn't going to read this book, but I've heard so many positive reviews. I wasn't going to read it because it's an unfinished novel. There's like a chapter or 2 missing because before she could write it, Elizabeth Gaskell unfortunately passed away. But people tend to say that you kind of know where it's going, and it's still a really good book even though it's missing like the last conclusion, so I'm excited. And that was everything on the first bookshelf, and now let's get to the second one. Okay, here we have the second bookshelf that is on display most of the time. Firstly, we have the Everman's Library Classics right here. I'm gonna be honest, a lot of the books in this edition I have bought because they were there was this seller that was selling them for very cheap. So there are some books that I feel like I wouldn't have bought if it wasn't just such a good deal, because there are some titles I haven't really heard much about, but I was like, this is such a pretty edition and so cheap, so I'm gonna get it. Next we have just a random Sherlock Holmes collection. So this is actually a gift my friend Julia bought when she was in London. She was visiting London when I was in high school, I believe, and she remembered that I like watching Sherlock Holmes, so she bought me this book, which, like, first of all, that's such a dedication, because like it's very big and very heavy, so like if this was like a week or weekend trip, this probably like took over her suitcase. Let's get closer a little bit actually. This is a little note I got from Caroline Marie Reads when I received this, you know, this is a portrait of Ian Forster. So I bought it on Etsy from her, and it's really cute, and it came with this note. This is how this looks. On the back there's the first page of a review. This is my favorite man. And here we have the Oxford Words Classics, which I really enjoyed. They're really floppy, but the font in the book itself isn't very big, and I don't like kind of the font itself. Like, it looks like Times New Roman. And this is a little pin my friend got me for Christmas, I believe, and it has a quote from Jane Eyre. It's really pretty. I should put it on some like jean jacket or something, but I don't know, I kind of like I like everything here. Then we have only 3 books from Macmillan Collector's Library, one vintage edition of Jane Austen, which I'm not a fan of, and what is this? What's a Collins Classics? And then one book from, it says Wednesday Books. So let's show you all the books one by one. So we're starting with the first 3 books in the Barsetshire Chronicles. We have The Warden, which I read and gave it 4 stars, and it made me really excited to get to the rest of the books in the series. We have Barchester Towers, which I haven't read yet, and Dr. Throne, obviously haven't read it. Then we have 3 books that I bought, but I don't know much about. I bought them just because they were cheap. So we have Edith Wharton, The Reef. I bought it because I love Edith Wharton. We have Silas Marner by George Eliot, and a book that's title I will not even attempt to say out loud. So let me show you. Did you have enough time to read it? I hope so. And lastly, from the Everyman's Library collection, we have A Passage to India by Ian Forster, which I bought in Montreal when I was visiting Canada. So yet another book I bought for very cheap. Next we have my Sherlock Holmes collection, but it's very heavy and I don't want to pull it out. So next we have Oxford Words Classics. I have the complete short stories by Oscar Wilde. I read a few from this collection. We have 4 major plays by Henrik Ibsen. I haven't read any of his plays yet, but I do know A Doll's House is a very famous one and it's very kind of feminist, so I'm looking forward to it. Then we have Summer by Edith Wharton. I read it very recently, and look at this cover. I mean, I was expecting like a very easy summer love story. What else can you expect from a cover like this? But at this point I am convinced that Edith Wharton was physically unable to write anything that was not just heart-wrenching and like filled with misery. I enjoyed it though, I give it 4 stars. Oh no, this is not cute lighting. Then you have The Odd Woman by George Gissing. I haven't read it yet, but I do know it's kind of a proto-feminist classic, so I'm looking forward to it. And lastly, we have The New Woman and Other Emancipated Women plays, and it is a collection of plays. I got it from a friend for my birthday last week, and I've never heard of it, but I guess it's a collection of plays that revolve around the theme of like emancipation of women, so I'm also very much looking forward to reading those. Then we have 3 books from Macmillan Collector's Library. We have the older edition when it comes to Macmillan's Collector's Library. This is Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. I bought it because it was cheap. We have The Importance of Being Earnest and Other plays by Oscar Wilde. I have read all of the plays in this collection and I really enjoyed them all, especially his comedies. Chef's kiss. And lastly we have Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. I'm pretty sure I have this marked as read on Goodreads, but the situation is that I took a class about Shakespeare's adaptation and I was supposed to read this play. We were reading a different play each week and I put it off, and the night before the class I was reading this and I was tired, so I started reading it, but then I kind of skim read the rest. But from what I've read, I really enjoyed it. So, and I really enjoyed the discussion in class, so I really would like to reread it or kind of read it properly, because I think there's a chance I would enjoy it even more. I think of Pride and Prejudice in the vintage kind of collection of Jane Austen. I don't like this edition because when you open it up, you have to kind of hold it like this for it to stay open, because otherwise it will just close right up. I have a video about different editions of classics and which I would recommend, so I will link it in the description too. Then we have Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which I am ashamed to say I have DNF'd, so I did not finish this book. I was bored out of my mind. There were so many descriptions of nature. I just didn't care, and this is one of the classics that I DNF'd that I'm like, I might give it another shot, to be honest. So, but I really like this edition. I really like this like grey with this green. I'm not sure if you can see, but the Frankenstein part is kind of textured. It's really pretty. And lastly, from bookshelf number 3, we have I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith. Didn't love this book, I gave it 3 stars, but I'm kind of keeping it because I really like the edition. It has like really green inside pages here. And that's the whole second bookshelf, so let's get to the third one. Here I have a bookshelf with my modern classics. I'm not very satisfied with how it looks. As you can see, it's kind of a mix of everything, because here's Stephen King, for example. I mean, you could, I guess, say that this is like genre classic, but yeah. So really quickly, here we have my vintage classics. 3 books from, I think it's called Vintage International. It's like US. 2 books by Stephen King. I don't know what publishing house this is. Here we have a few editions of Virginia Woolf. Not quite sure about the publishing house. I think it's called, here it says Harcourt? Not sure. And here we have other penguins. Oh, except this one. So it's just a random Agatha Christie, but the rest is Penguin Modern Classics and this guy right here. So let's go one by one. So we're starting with vintage classics. I have Slaughterhouse 5 and Breakfast of Champions by Kurt Vonnegut. I have read Slaughterhouse 5 last year and I really enjoyed it. I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. It's a really weird book. It's like, it's really one of a kind. It's like nothing I have ever read. If you haven't read it yet and you've read the premise and you're like, that doesn't sound like something I would like, I would still give it a shot because it might surprise you. The Breakfast of Champions I have not read yet. I'm kind of confused. I'm not sure in what order I should read Kurt Vonnegut's books, because I know that there are characters that appear in some of his other books, and I'm not sure what would be the best way to approach his books. If you have any tips, I would really appreciate it. Then we have The Dumb House by John Burnside. I DNF'd this. It just wasn't my cup of tea. It's very gruesome, and even though I found the writing style to be very kind of flowery, if I remember correctly, I just didn't care about the plot, so I should probably unhaul it. Then we have The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, which I really enjoyed. Then we have Sonar by John Williams. I haven't read it yet, but this also has infidelity in it, so I'm not looking forward to it. And lastly we have A Country Doctor's Notebook by Nikolai Bulgakov. I'm really interested in like history and sociology of medicine and like Victorian medicine. I mean, this is set in Russia in I think the beginning of 19th century, but I think it's going to be very interesting. Next I have 3 books by Toni Morrison. I have not read any of them, but I have Beloved, which I would like to get to this year, The Bluest Eye, and Song of Solomon. Then we have 2 books by Stephen King. I will mention them very briefly. I have The Stand and Different Seasons, which I think is a collection of short stories or novellas. Also, it's a very weird cover. Then we have 3 random books, which I'm not sure if they should be here. I mean, The Color Purple by Alice Walker is definitely a modern classic. I have read it and really enjoyed it. Kindred by Octavia Butler is a kind of classic when it comes to science fiction. Just like Flowers for Algernon by Daniel, I don't know how to say his name, but I haven't read this one yet. Then we have Virginia Woolf. I have read all of those. We have Orlando, which I did not enjoy. I talked about it in my last wrap-up. And we have Three Greenies, which I really loved. I feel like I prefer Virginia Woolf's non-fiction to her non-fiction, like her essays are really interesting for me. And lastly, To the Lighthouse. Like I said, I have random Agatha Christie. This is Hercule Poirot's Christmas. I really enjoyed this one. And we have Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I have not read this yet. Now let's get to Penguin Modern Classics. I am ashamed to say I have not read any of the smaller ones. Here I have Notes on Nationalism by George Orwell, Create Dangerously by Albert Camus, and Letters from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King. Then we have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Jackson. I have not read this yet. Divine is Run by James Baldwin. I have read this. We have Howl, Kaddish and Other Poems by Allen Ginsberg. Overall I give it 3 stars, but I do think that everyone should read Howl. It's a very haunting poem, I think. Then we have A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. I have watched this play on stage about 7 or 8 times because I used to work at a theater, at different theaters in Warsaw. But I would actually never read the original, so I'm interested to see how they would compare. Yet again, we have short stories by Ian Forster, but in a different edition. On the Rock by Jack Kerouac. I'm not sure how to say this name, I haven't read this yet. Tender is the Night by F. Scott Fitzgerald, also not read yet. And A Month in the Country by J.L. Carr. I haven't read this yet, but I think it's going to be on my July TBR, because I do think it has some kind of like summer vibes. Yeah, it's set in the summer in countryside in the 1920s. And the last thing is The Pursuit of Love by Nancy Mitford, which I haven't read yet, but I really like the cover. So that's everything when it comes to my classics that are in English. Now I will very briefly show you all of my classics that I have in Polish. So lastly, we have a quick overview of my classics that I have in Polish. So here I have North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, Cranford, also by Elizabeth Gaskell, Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. The rest is my Jane Austen collection. So we have Sense and Sensibility, Emma, Pride and Prejudice, Northanger Abbey, Mansfield Park, and Persuasion. Here we have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas in 2 books. Also in 2 books or tomes we have Brother Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. This is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and this is collection of plays by Molière. We have Tartuffe, Don Juan, and The Misanthrope. I don't know how to pronounce that, but there you go. Here we have Mrs. Dalloway and The Waves, both by Virginia Woolf, although The Waves I will probably unhaul because if I would like to read it in the future, I would rather read it, you know, originally in English. Here we have The Portrait of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and I actually really liked it because of how pretty the kind of pages in between chapters look. Here we have Girl Interrupted by Susanna Kaysen, One Flew Over Cuckoo's Nest by Ken Kesey, and The Belljar by Sylvia Plath. This is where my weird obsession with psychiatric hospitals has started. Then from left to right we have The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, and Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. I have not read The Unbearable Lightness of Being yet, but it is on my TBR for this year. And lastly we have 2 books that do not want to stand on their own, and those are collected short stories by Sylvia Plath on the left and Madame Bovary by Gustav Flaubert on the right. And that concludes my whole collection. So that's everything, that's my whole collection. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you in the next video. Bye!